If you've watched the first video, you'd know that the concept of reading is much more complex than is commonly believed. When we read, we interpret, and the fact that an interpretation must take place carries with it the likelihood of error, misjudgment, and misinterpretation. And there is a lot of factors and nuances in play that render reading such a double-sided task. A. Intentionalism, the writer's original intent. B. Time, how meaning mutates and changes over time, and the difficulties that shroud the concept of translation. All of these are interrelated, and when found, are always found together. There are fundamental and mainly philosophical differences between reading in the English and Indo-European sense and reading in the Quranic or Arabic sense. Reading, in the first sense, illustrates perfectly the problems and paradoxes that underlie the task of reading. Reading in the Arabic sense, however, is entirely different, and this is due to the innate differences in how the Semites and Europeans view and interpret the world and phenomena. Different ethno-linguistic groups have different thought worlds, as linguist Benjamin Lee Whorf put it. And the same is demonstrably true of the Semites and their Western counterparts. Each language arranges and organizes reality in the world differently. Certain concepts, which are familiar to and are the product of Western minds, don't translate well, if at all, to certain ethno-linguistic groups, because they don't share the same structures of grammar and speech. The Quran is unique in that it's not read like other texts. The words possess a wider radius of meaning, or as we say, connotations, and those connotations can only be determined by studying how a given word is used in different contexts. We here note the difference between what a word denotes and what it connotes or implies. Denoting refers to the primary meaning of a given word, i.e., what it directly and specifically means or signifies in its given context or setting. Connoting, on the other hand, refers to the meanings which are not directly given or inferred from the context. For example, the word cat might denote the image of a domestic animal, not specifically the attributes of the class or species to which it belongs, for instance, felinity. Similarly, the word sun denotes the image of a celestial object, but not directly its warmth, which here is one of its connotations. In the Quran, these two aspects of meaning must be accounted for, as they are the key to fully understanding what a certain word means and why it was used rather than any other word. And I'm here going to replay a segment from the last video. Since we referenced the etymology of the word read, we shall now compare it to the quasi-equivalent word used in the Quran. And it will be found very intriguing that there's no such word as read in the English or Indo-European sense in the Quran. We find only the words iqra, from which is derived the name al-Quran or Quran. Also tilawa, which is the main term used to express the act of reading or reciting the Quran. Contrary to the popular belief, iqra does not mean read or recite even, and we know this by examining the morphology of the word iqra in different Quranic contexts. And we're here applying the hermeneutics principle to understand the part from the whole, the same way a sentence is understood grammatically. We find here that the word occurs in more than one setting: a cosmological setting, qararan, designating or describing the earth's position, not only with respect to the species and creatures crawling upon and indwelling the earth, but also with respect to the heavens, the samawat, and the Quranic image of the universe. We also find istaqar, describing how an object settles or reposes after a period of flux, change, or movement. We also find qurri aina, describing the contrary state of fear and insecurity which Mary was experiencing before God eventually bestowed upon her the peace and quiet that He had promised her, therefore describing the opposite state of disappointment. From these various morphological uses of the word, we discern that the word iqra, falsely equated with read, has a greater and even deeper radius of significance than previously thought. And from it we also understand the underlying meaning of the word al-Quran, and why it was named that. As Dr. Munsterberg perfectly put it, the world becomes a world by its identical recurrence. This identity means fulfillment, means satisfaction, means value. And whatever changes must still present an identity in its changes, for that's where its identity is expressed, and it does this by showing that the change belongs to its own meaning. The other word used in the Quran is tilawa, the same word used to describe how the moon apparently follows or tails the sun. and notably never catching up to it. And we also get this from studying the morphology of the word tilawa as used exclusively in the Quran. If anything, this offers us an extraordinary example of the differences between reading in the Indo-European sense as editorial and interventionist, in that it involves on the reader's part the unconscious acts of rearrangement and or reformulation more patently demonstrated by the translator, and reading in the Quranic sense as non-editorial, but rather a relation of constant pursuit and guidance, because, as evidenced by the morphological method, we're pursuing the essence of the word in various contextual territories, and we here see not only the difference between iqra and tilawa, but also the relationship between them. The reader pursues it into settlement, or refuge, so to speak, a final resting place, sheltered from uncertainty and change. This method and way of reflection, tilawa, is the sole key to understanding the Quran, and it appears in an exemplary form in the story of Abraham. In fact, it was first taught by the Prophet Abraham, who, after renouncing the idolatry of his society, the worship of idols, resorted to the free contemplation of the cosmos, where, one night, he embarked on a patient search for God. That night, Abraham began tailing, tilawa, the heavenly objects, first spotting a planet, a kawkab, and declared it to be God, but renouncing it as soon as it vanished from his sight. He then saw the moon, and declared it to be God as well, but once more renouncing it when it vanished from his sight. He then saw the sun, the major object of worship in numerous cultures, here implying that his search continued till the morning of the next day, and likewise after declaring it to be God and renouncing it, when it began setting, i.e. vanishing, it became clear to him from the pattern who the Creator was, realizing that it was He who'd guided him throughout his contemplative journey, discovering him through the uniform behavior of these objects, which simultaneously demonstrated the uniformity and commonness of their Creator, the same way a reader of the Quran unveils the truth underlying a certain word through its uniform application throughout the book. In Abraham's story, each of these celestial objects served as a metaphor articulating an underlying idea, and their combined expression compounded the metaphor and made the underlying idea that much clearer. The importance of the story is manifold, and there's a lot to be learned from it. Not only does it reveal to us the true methodological approach to the Quran, but the conditions that needs to be met for this method to prove successful. And it's only one condition, chiefly demonstrated by Abraham's renouncing of idolatry. The idol here is not so much the physical form pictured by us, a statue, a sculpture, an effigy, etc., but the ideas, or dogma, that live in and are evoked by them, and for which the physical idols only serve as mnemonic triggers. The repudiation, or renouncing of idolatry, is primarily ideal, and is more so the renouncing of the ideas and beliefs embodied by the physical idol. Abraham approached God with a clean slate, so to speak, and with a clear, untainted intention to find Him.